The story didn't begin under the glare of camera flashes or within the pages of royal headlines. It started in a setting so remarkably ordinary that you could almost overlook the immense weight of what was about to unfold. Imagine a handful of people gathered together in a quiet, softly lit room. Their conversation was light and easy, with laughter spilling as casually as wine being poured into glasses. Among this small group was Serena Williams, a global icon known for her powerful presence, someone who rarely wasted her words. She was a person whose silence often carried far more meaning than the endless chatter of other people. Her quiet observation was a force of nature in itself, a skill honed over decades of reading opponents and analyzing every subtle movement on the court. The comfortable, flowing rhythm of the evening suddenly shifted when a single whisper drifted across the table, cutting through the pleasantries. This whisper wasn't about tennis, nor was it about fashion or even the whirlwind royal story of Meghan Markle that had captivated the world. It was a hushed, deceptively small remark, yet it was sharp enough to slice cleanly through the laughter. A single phrase that hung in the air with unexpected gravity: Meghan's real age. At first, for a brief moment, no one moved, but then Serena did. The legendary, unshakable composure that had defined her career, both on and off the court, faltered just for a fraction of a second. Her back leaned slightly deeper into her chair, her focus sharpened, and her eyes narrowed with an intensity familiar to anyone who had ever faced her across a net. Then came her question. It was spoken softly, almost under her breath, but it was heavy enough to freeze the entire room, demanding an answer that no one had. How did she have kids? This wasn't a question born of malice. It certainly wasn't idle gossip. It was pure calculation, a flash of instinct from a mind trained to see inconsistencies. It was the same analytical prowess that had guided her through countless high-stakes competitions, spotting the flaw in an opponent's strategy before the serve had even landed. Those in the room who truly knew Serena Williams understood the gravity of that moment. If she was the one asking the question, it meant she already sensed something far deeper, something that didn't add up. To fully understand why Serena's simple words struck with such force, you have to carefully pull apart the threads of Meghan Markle's meticulously stitched public timeline. Officially, the world knows Meghan Markle's birth date as August 4th, 1981. According to this narrative, she graduated from the prestigious Northwestern University in 2003, placing her at the perfect age of 22. On paper, it's a flawless, straightforward story, but stories that appear a little too perfect rarely hold up under the weight of intense scrutiny. When you begin to dig into the university's archives, the old photos and alumni records start to whisper a completely different tale, one that challenges the very foundation of her biography. There's a photograph of Meghan in a salsa club group shot from her university days, her smile as radiant and camera-ready as ever. Yet, a closer look reveals something puzzling. The classmates clustered around her weren't your typical 20-somethings. Their birth years, listed in alumni directories, placed them as being born in the early 1970s. These were people who, academically, should have been nearly a full decade ahead of her. Some of them were already graduating from high school in the late 1980s, long before Meghan was supposedly still navigating the halls of Immaculate Heart High School in 1999. These weren't just random, fleeting overlaps at a party. Their names consistently cropped up right beside hers in official alumni bulletins, at club events, and in social circles, year after year after year. They weren't just passing acquaintances, they were her established peer group, her circle. If Meghan Markle truly was only 22 years old in 2003, why did her closest peers all belong to a completely different age bracket? The simple math refused to align, and when the numbers stubbornly refuse to fit, the very foundation of the story begins to tremble and crack. This is precisely what Serena Williams, with her razor-sharp instincts, recognized in that fleeting moment. Her pivotal question wasn't cruel or intended to cause harm. It was the natural, logical consequence of watching the pieces of a carefully constructed puzzle suddenly refuse to connect. Because if Meghan's real age didn't match her official biography, then everything else tied to that age, her pregnancies, her life milestones, and even her celebrated image as the glowing, modern royal mother suddenly started to look less like reality and more like carefully staged theater. Consider the pregnancies, which were presented to the world as a modern fairy tale. From the outside, the narrative was flawless. We saw a constantly smiling Duchess, with hands tenderly cradling her baby bump at every single public appearance, as the world applauded each beautifully composed photograph. But the small details, the ones often missed in the initial excitement, began to tug at the edges of this perfect illusion. In some images, the bump sat high, firm, and perfectly round. In others, captured within just a matter of days, it appeared noticeably smaller, positioned lower on her frame, almost as if it had been completely reshaped overnight. Digital cameras don't lie, especially not the relentless, high-definition lenses of royal photographers who are trained to document everything, right down to the precise tilt of a hat. The constant and dramatic shifts in size and position were obvious enough to make people whisper and question what they were seeing. And then came the piece of footage that went viral in the quieter, more analytical corners of the internet, the clip that became infamous as the moon bump video. In it, Meghan is seen gracefully easing herself into a chair, smiling as she always does, until the distinct curve of her stomach appears to fold in on itself unnaturally. It bent and creased in a way that no real pregnancy, which is composed of fluid and tissue, ever could. The palace quickly brushed the incident aside, issuing vague explanations that blamed odd angles, the bunching of fabric, or tricky lighting. But once you've seen it, it is impossible to unsee. That single video clip became far more than a passing curiosity. It was a permanent question mark burned directly into the public memory. And when you pair that visual evidence with the sudden, instinctive doubt voiced by a close friend like Serena Williams, the weight of the mystery becomes undeniable. What made the growing unease even sharper were the small, specific details whispered by those who worked closest to Meghan, the people who didn't seek the spotlight. These were the assistants, the event planners, and the security staff who live and work entirely in the background. One recalled how Meghan, supposedly heavily pregnant on paper, moved around backstage with the speed and agility of someone who is far from their final term. Another staff member quietly admitted that they never once saw her belly bare, not for a fitting or in a casual moment. It was always covered, always guarded. A baby bump that was so prominently displayed for the entire world to see was somehow completely hidden from those standing just a few feet away. Individually, each of these fragments might be easy to dismiss as coincidence or misinterpretation. But when pieced together, they built a compelling picture that a powerhouse like Serena Williams simply couldn't ignore. A picture where the polished narrative didn't match the observable reality. It was a picture where a close friend, trained to trust her powerful instincts, could only ask the one question that no one else dared to put into words. Was Meghan ever really pregnant? The silence that followed Serena's question in that room wasn't casual or brief. It was heavy, almost suffocating, the kind of profound silence that lingers in the air long after everyone has gone home. And though no one in that room dared to provide an answer, the question itself remained, echoing quietly, just waiting for the right moment to unravel everything that had been built on the official story. This was no longer just about royal gossip. It was the seed of a profound mystery, and mysteries, once they are planted in the public mind, have a stubborn way of growing. When Meghan's first pregnancy was announced to the world, the media coverage was overwhelming and celebratory. Tabloids splashed her radiant, smiling face across every front page. Dedicated royal watchers camped outside event venues for days just to catch a glimpse, and glossy magazines printed lavish spreads celebrating the next beautiful chapter of the Windsor fairy tale. Every single detail seemed to be perfectly choreographed for maximum effect. The outfits were carefully chosen to highlight the growing bump. The speeches were thoughtfully laced with themes of maternal warmth, and the official photos were curated to absolute perfection. But just beneath the polished surface, sharp-eyed observers began noticing that the rhythm of the performance didn't quite match the music of reality. In some of her late-stage pregnancy appearances, Meghan would glide effortlessly through large crowds in towering stiletto heels, her posture remaining as straight and graceful as if she wasn't carrying any extra weight at all. Event staff would whisper to each other afterward that she never once looked winded, never paused to catch her breath, and never displayed the subtle stiffness or discomfort that is so common in the later stages of pregnancy. Her grace seemed almost uncanny, rehearsed to the point of being unnatural. One experienced event planner later described the experience as watching someone play a role so convincingly that you almost forget it's supposed to be a role at all. Then came the day that sent shockwaves through the community of royal observers. Meghan stepped back into the intense glare of the global spotlight just hours after supposedly giving birth to her first child. The scene itself could have been ripped directly from the pages of a Hollywood storybook. Her hair was flawless, her makeup was glowing, her custom-made dress was fitted perfectly, and her high heels were clicking against the palace floor as if she had spent the entire morning at a glamorous photo shoot rather than in a delivery room. Medical professionals watching from around the world raised their eyebrows in collective disbelief. The physical recovery from childbirth, especially for a first child, rarely, if ever, looked that smooth and effortless. There were absolutely no visible signs of discomfort, no hesitation in her confident steps, and no guarded movements that typically reveal postpartum soreness or extreme fatigue. It was as though the monumental act of giving birth had left no physical mark on her at all. The image was undeniably powerful, perhaps too powerful. It was polished to such a degree that it no longer resembled reality, and that very perfection became the central problem. A new mother glowing with joy was believable. A woman looking completely untouched, as if nothing significant had happened, was not. Behind the closed doors of the palace, those closest to the intricate machinery of royal appearances whispered about a growing list of odd inconsistencies. Staff members noted that Meghan's official schedule during both of her alleged pregnancies was surprisingly full, with very few adjustments ever made. She rarely canceled events, hardly ever shortened her public appearances, and seemed to maintain her energy at levels that defied all normal expectations of a late-term pregnancy. Some even mentioned that they had never seen her needing any kind of medical assistance, personal aids, or even the quiet breaks that pregnant women so often rely on to get through a demanding day. For these insiders, it wasn't the big, televised moments that raised the most serious questions. It was the countless small ones, the everyday gaps in the narrative where reality should have peeked through the facade, but never ever did. The more people looked, the more the entire story resembled a carefully crafted performance rather than a lived, human experience. In the hallowed halls of power, silence often speaks far louder than words. Within the fortified palace walls, the truth about Meghan's motherhood was guarded with the kind of ironclad discipline usually reserved for national state secrets. Every aide, every staff member, and every medical professional connected to her story seemed to be bound by an invisible chain of loyalty. To publicly question the official narrative was to risk immediate exile, not just from your employment, but from the entire influential ecosystem that revolves around the world of royalty. Loyalty wasn't just expected, it was fiercely demanded. And that unspoken demand created a wall of silence so high and so thick that even the most seasoned journalists couldn't find a way to scale it. Outside of those imposing walls, however, people were diligently piecing things together on their own. The photographs, the video clips, the hushed whispers from former staff, the old yearbook records, each one was like a single shard of a broken mirror, reflecting a version of Meghan Markle that simply didn't line up with the fairy tale being sold to the public. For many, the inconsistencies eventually became too numerous and too glaring to ignore. The baby bump that seemed to shift from high to low, the flawless post-birth appearance, the complete absence of any verifiable medical records, all of it added up to a picture that looked more constructed than lived. The stakes of this question extended far beyond just one woman. Meghan represented the future of modern royalty, the promise of inclusivity, progress, and a bridge between ancient tradition and the contemporary world. But if the very foundation of her personal story was flawed, then the entire progressive image built upon it became dangerously unstable. The royal brand, after all, thrives on public trust, on the carefully maintained illusion that its ancient rituals and modern members are rooted in genuine authenticity. Shatter that illusion, and the monarchy itself risks a catastrophic collapse. That is likely why secrecy became the chosen strategy, not because the palace could easily prove the truth, but because even acknowledging the cracks in the story would threaten to unravel everything. And so, the pieces continued to pile up. The ever-changing bump, the moon bump video, the lightning-fast recovery, the locked records, and the persistent whispers from staff. Alone, each could perhaps be explained away. But together, they formed a powerful narrative that no palace press office could ever fully erase. What unsettled people most wasn't necessarily the idea of the deception itself. It was the chilling precision of it all. The most haunting part of this entire mystery was not the whispers or the missing documents, but the simple, unanswerable question that started it all. How did she have kids? It was the kind of question that cut directly through all the layers of public relations spin, reaching something primal and universally understood. Children, family, birth, these are universal human experiences. To cast doubt on them is to shake the very foundation of identity itself. And that's why Serena's instinct carried so much weight. She wasn't a journalist or a critic. She was a friend, someone close enough to know when something just didn't feel right. The truth, if it exists in full, remains locked away, perhaps forever. But locked doors don't erase suspicion, they only amplify it. History has a way of eventually surfacing what was once deliberately buried. Until then, the story lives on in fragments, scattered across whispers and archives, stitched together by those who dare to question. What endures most is not the image of perfection that Meghan and the palace projected, but the long, dark shadow cast by doubt.